Well, hey folks, so good to see y'all. Thanks for joining. My gosh, look at this like group of people. I'm like just dumbfounded. I'm just like looking and staring and just like smiling. I'm like, do you guys feel like creeped out that like I'm just like looking at you or something? No, 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 no. You guys are all folks that I admire. I love having you here, and I love that we have just a great group of people to discuss design systems because yeah, design systems have been quite on, like the forefront of people's minds right now. Thanks to some people on this call, making, big grand calls for, big global design systems. And we'll talk about that stuff. But, I figured we might want to, build our way up there, probably start from like a smaller sort of, if we're talking about components, maybe you start with an atom here and kind of, and then kind of work our way up here. And I just wanted to start, maybe by talking about what is the purpose of a design system in the first place. Let's kind of level set, from that area. And for what it's worth, I am going to be taking some notes over in a Fig Jam, and I'll send that link over as we're talking, just so I'm not like dividing my attention here. But let's just go ahead and like open that question up, to the table as far as like, what is a design system for? Like who is it for? What's it trying to accomplish? And like what sort of artifacts are we talking about here? What sort of role does that play in the design and development process? So I'll just go ahead and open that up. Oh, on the note, is that me?
That means not first, not it.
Uh, oh, geez. Gosh, you
Ben,
all,
Ben,
man,
you
it's
Ben, you were last.
no, 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 it's a fair thing, because it's a big question, right? And it's kind of intentionally big because there's a lot to unload there. There's a lot of ambiguity, I think, when people are starting a design system in the first place. Like, do we know exactly who we're building this thing for, and how's it going to be used in, at the end of the day? um Actually, Nathan, I didn't get a chance to talk with you last time because I was absent. I had a scheduling conflict there, and but reading through your materials, you have such, this like such a mind for the components of a component library or a design system, right? You've really articulated what one looks like structured and what sort of things it includes. I'm kind of curious, how do you define, what goes into a design system? How do you align that with that purpose?
I think maybe to start with the purpose question, there's a lot of rationale that design system practitioners rattle off really quickly. They start with efficiency and consistency are the two things that come to mind. And there's lots of other qualities that you can name too. But really, I tend to start with the design system is there to solve a lot of foundational, smaller problems because you have a lot of different people solving a lot of problems, and they need to focus on harder, sort of bigger compositional problems with the interface and foundational interface challenges like small components, atomic things, buttons, icons, etc., as well as all of the different types of typical color and typography choices that you have can be made reusable for designers and engineers predominantly, and surfaced and documented for use in their tools like Figma for designers and React code for developers. So the design system is there to help the community come around and decide what those foundational choices are, to be able to encapsulate them into those kinds of tools and documentations to explain them so that a wide range of different designers and developers can reuse them in their own work. And then as a byproduct, hopefully you get UI consistency. Hopefully you get more efficiently produced things. Hopefully you get higher quality results with all the smaller things than you would have had all the individuals made all those pieces themselves.
Beautiful. And I'm just taking notes as you're going. I'm just like, lots of gems, lots of nuggets in here, so it's a challenge for me to keep up when you're just like spouting so much gold there. uh One thing that really struck my mind there, and I'd love to hear other voices on this too, is this idea of solving smaller problems. I thought that was a really good way to say this. It's like almost taking away the nuances in such, or like the noise, the background noise of making some sorts of decisions or having some decisions done for us so that we can focus on the bigger problems. Where do you know when to stop at that fidelity, in terms of like when a smaller problem is actually a larger problem? Not
Come
it.
on, Ben, Brad, what do you got?
Oh, I could. I know he's like, I
It's a
know
war of attrition.
it
Uh,
is.
no, it really like the threshold gets crossed when it's like this is a solved problem. We don't need to solve this anymore. This thing pops up again and again. Let's like, you know, make a call, go with it, and say, let's not talk about this ever again. That's not entirely true, but it's like it is. This is like here's this common problem. Here's this thing that like people are frustrated with, or they have to recreate again and again and again, or it's like the same sort of like just speed bump, right? And so it's like how can we kind of just create a solution or a set a flexible solution, even like something that is like
Yeah.
the right level of dials or whatever it is, but some sort of constraints or whatever that just like help people move on. And I think that like what Nathan said was exactly right. And a lot of what we tend to look through is the word is respect. It's like how do we make the most
Oh,
like sort of
nice.
respectful use of people's time and life energy, right? And having them rebuild a checkbox or a button for the 17th time is not a respectful use of people's time and energy, right? So it's like that kind of like when does the sort of like common problems sort of that pop up again and again that are all effectively solved the same way, but just maybe a different flavor, right? And we kind of call it like the heartache of design at scale. It's like, oh, this person has like a good solution for this, and then this next person has a similarly good solution that's kind of sort of the same, but maybe just unintentionally different. And then this other
Yeah.
person has a similar solution, so it's like they're all solving the same thing, but just kind of having to execute it their own way. So it's like, how might a design system just be like, okay, let's triangulate, all of these pretty good solutions, call it a day, and then so anybody else that sort of encounters it is able to just grab it and move on with their lives.
I have a
I've,
thought there, Brad. If
yeah.
you, I can jump into Geoff, the idea of respect as sort of like
It's,
it's a really cool concept, Brad. I think the challenge with it, at least something that I'm seeing recently, is that the way somebody interprets respect is unique to them, and so this is where we get all this gray area. Recently I've had all these engagements with clients where these big organizations have made promises to potential employees that one of the benefits that you get by working here is autonomy. And so it's like this, it's like in order to gather the right amount of people that we need to do the work we have to do, we're saying a benefit of our employment is you get to work the way you want to work. And in some ways, it's like I understand that as a human, as somebody who's creative, I like to make things. I do want that flexibility in the way that I work, but there is a bit of compromise, right? Like we have to say, if we're all working towards the same goal, where do we draw that line? Of saying you get autonomy in some areas, but not in others. And so when that's the case, at least what I'm seeing is the idea of respect is it's different. It's like it's at a different place, right? If I've been promised autonomy and you're telling me I have to use this system in order for us to create things more cohesively or more efficiently or all those reasons, then you're kind of like crossing into what you promised me I wouldn't have, you know. So
Yeah,
that's like where I feel like the rough edges are of that,
dude, it's like United States, like the ethos of the United, it's like personal freedom and like liberty.
Yes.
It's like I don't want to wear my seatbelt. I don't want to like do this. I don't want to have to like. Just read an article yesterday. It's like the people are pushing back like table saws. Like there's like a safety standard that they're trying to put in place so people aren't like yanking their fingers off and stuff. And
Yeah.
there's like a bunch of pushback. It's like it's my right as a I need to have the autonomy as a United States citizen to shave my thumb right off. But
Yeah.
but I think that there is something, and I do have like a funny anecdote. I was working with a certain shipping company, uh, whose brand color happens to be brown, and they were describing some designers that at one point in time like had sort of come in and they're like, you know, this brown thing, it's I don't like it. Let's not do brown. And it's like, dude, you're at the wrong company. Like, that's not the place that where you have autonomy, right? Like, if you work like at a place, and this is why I kind of brought up like the whole like kind of political part of it. Like, we are individuals, right? We have personal freedoms, like we have or a certain level of autonomy, but we also exist in a society, and we, you know, reap the rewards of living in a society, and we have a responsibility to be good actors and good citizens in that society. And the same holds true for these microcosms, right? These organizations. It's like where do you draw the lines around autonomy, flexibility, creativity versus constraint and control. And I think that like when you work with enough people, that I think a lot of like their MO, and I'm sure Ben and Nathan, like you've experienced this yourself, when you have just designers who just like want to design like just because they're like, oh yeah, like I've got these ideas and I love like doing this and I'm gonna like reinvent this thing. And you're like, well, like you're just kind of making a mess, you know, for no real good reason aside from you like to do this, and you enjoy this, the autonomy that kind of comes with it. And so it's like I think that whenever you like zoom out at an organization wide level, you have to kind of collectively define what makes sense
Yeah.
to share, and what makes sense to sort of like, you know, like you're defining those criterias. And that's like kind of like what a design system is like here's here's this sort of settled stuff that we don't want to just kind of constantly kick up dust on and make a mess. We want to kind of have this layer here that's like settled solutions, the boring stuff, so that the people can exercise their autonomy and creativity and stuff in other
Yeah,
places.
like I want to build on that because you're hitting on a few terms that sort of trigger me in a similar way, which is when someone wants to be autonomous, that doesn't necessarily mean they need to be individualistic. And a scale that you can think about is the scale from individualism to collectivism. And there's certain things as you behave within a network, within a system, within relationships of collaborative behaviors, that you need to drift towards the collective. You can be autonomous working at different hours of the day, but you can't be individualistic to say, I'm not going to use Slack, Figma, GitHub, or any of your tools. I'm going to code and design in my own tool set in my own way. It's not going to work. And so you have to be fairly collective in the choices that you're making for that. And so being autonomous, I'd like to think about that and is more around the hows rather than the what's. And how you get your work done, that's great. But like what work you're going to do, you're going to be defining experiences and journeys, and you're going to be solving user problems and that kind of thing. That doesn't mean that you're also solving the focused ring dashed separation color of the button. Like somebody else solved that. You don't need to change that. You don't need to change the border radius of the focus ring. We're done. Like that's not useful behavior. And so that gets at, I think, part of the root of our discussion here, which is design systems inhibiting creativity. We need to be specific about what that creativity is. What are you being hired to create? You're being hired to solve journeys, solve user problems, essentially serve the collective interest of all of us, solving all of our different interrelated problems together. And so bringing it back to a metaphor like Brad, you were talking about before, our autonomous vehicles, does that mean they can go on whatever surface they want at whatever time they want without constraint? No, they have to be on roads, and they have to be aware of signage and signals and cars and other things around them to make those choices well. They're behaving in a more collective space with lots of rules and constraints. So autonomy doesn't mean do whatever you want.
Yeah, I agree with that, Nathan. I think the challenge is that organizations that are using autonomy as a hiring benefit aren't being as nuanced as you are in this conversation, right? So there's work to do culturally to sort of like say, hey, we know you're here working now, and we know we promised you autonomy, but we need to put some constraint around that, and agree on that. So that's, in my mind, a big part of the effort of systems work, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. But also just like creative work in general, it's like what you're
Mm.
describing and like what the work is. It's like this is such a team sport. Like the whole enterprise of just like designing and building websites and apps and whatever. It's like it requires a bunch of people hitting it from different angles. Like I don't often do like the user research aspect of like what goes out the door of a product, nor does the back end developer who's sort of designing the the database structures and schemas and whatever. It's like it takes a lot of different people and a lot of different disciplines like kind of all hanging together. And I think that that's where that why design systems I think have been a powerful tool for cross-disciplinary collaboration is that it kind of helps serve as this like watering hole, as this like area of overlap, but also helps free people up these other disciplines up. So it's like, yeah, you can the designer or a UX designer can be focused on like what's the right IA or the right information architecture for this particular page, and like the components that just kind of fall out the other end because like other people have sort of sweated those details, right? So it's like you get this kind of nice, again, sort of division of labor, a sort of nice sort of Venn diagram overlap of it's like here's where we meet, like here's where we need to sort of align, but then here's like sort of our respective areas that we kind of collectively own. But I do think that like back to I think that distinction between kind of individualism and autonomy is a really good one, because it's like you cannot be individualistic in what's inherently a team sport, and again we see it, like we see people who are just like wired that way, and they're like chaos agents effectively in an organization where you're trying to get stuff done as a group.
And it's
Well,
not
how do we?
always that one last quick thought. It's
Yeah,
not always
yeah.
that there's intention in that, because a lot of the organizations that I've worked with have grown by acquiring, and so you end up sort of incorporating all these different ways of working. All the things that you described, Nathan, as like a choice that the organization would make has been made, but it's been made a dozen times, and now we're trying to cram all these groups together, So that just creates a whole nother set of challenges. And systems, I think, can serve those orgs well, but man, it's a lot of work to get that happening.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm going to muddy up the waters a little bit because why not, right? So we're talking about this individuality or this autonomy that we're promised in lots of cases as this like recruiting tool, but yet this isn't this isn't an individual game. There's no I in team, right? So like how does this play into the evolution of a design system? Where is the flexibility there for voices to come in where there's possibly strong opinions, where people want to be that chaos creator? How do we accommodate those disparate voices? Because I'm really interested, how that collaborative works, especially when we're talking about respect along the lines too. And then Brad, you brought up the whole political differentiation there, and we're
Sorry.
distributed teams, right? Oh yeah, so yeah, thanks a lot for that. No, these are distributed teams across cultural lines and boundaries, so we have to acknowledge that autonomy is going to look different to different people because we're in different cultures in the first place. So how are we reconciling the flexibility of a design system with its purpose and where it's going in the future?
I think one of the things I think about is some design systems are more or less flexible than other design systems. That is not a constant that all design systems have. I work with one client that it has a very well established and ironclad brand where you're really not supposed to, I'm going to mix up the colors here. You're not supposed to mess with the purple and the neutrals. Like there's one purple, use the purple.
Yeah.
That's the vivid purple that everybody's supposed to use. But they also have a range of other colors and palettes for you to liberally apply data visualization choices however you want. And
Yep.
so even within a design system, let alone across design systems, there are different levers that have more or less flexibility.
That's the
gets
big
at the
that's the big thing right there. It's like even like the the system is created of a bunch of different parts, and each one of those parts on its own has its own like
correct.
spectrum of rigidity versus flexibility, and it has to be that way.
And
But
so
so sorry to cut you off. Keep going. Yeah.
no, that's okay. So that gets at, I really struggle with the word never in design systems and design system guidelines, because particularly I tend to work with really larger companies that have hundreds of designers. And there's so much experimentation. You need to afford so many of those different teams within guardrails and within varying levels of flexibility and different choices, because they need to disrupt things and move the system forward. And that experimentation, that disruption, can often happen in a local sort of team specific environment.
Yep.
In order to solve problems the system hasn't solved, or evolve in a way the system isn't yet ready to evolve in a central capacity to do. And so you have to trust and also create a community around, visibility around enabling those people to experiment, but also staying within the guardrails. And that's usually design leadership and sort of community reviews and that kind of stuff. But there are different levers to sort of enable them to really express themselves in ways that create business value or push things forward.
Yep. That's really well said. I think that there's a lot there. And to use like a concrete example that I like to sort of conjure up whenever this whole, design systems and creativity chestnut comes up. The e-commerce site, right? Got a homepage. Very splashy, very seasonal, campaign driven, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You got to be like, given the old razzle dazzle there, right? That's what a homepage is for. An e-commerce site, you got it. You're blowing people's minds on the homepage. Checkout flow, not where you're razzle dazzling people, right? Like that's like meat and potatoes, utilitarian, getting business done, right? Transactional kind of stuff, right? So it's like within a site, again, it's not an all or nothing thing in the same way that in a design system it's not like an all or nothing thing. It's like there's so much nuance in all of this, and it's like here are the places where you just like knock yourself out. None of that like homepage hero area, or maybe there is like a hero component in the design system, and that's like a good fallback if like you don't have anything special going on, but maybe you do want to do your crazy whatever parallax or whatever like the modern kids are doing these days in their web designs. But it's like go knock yourself out. That is like the area by which where it's safe to do that stuff, and it makes good sense to do that. But when you're getting down to here's all these things that are really critical for people giving you money and completing a checkout flow, that stuff needs to be like pretty structured and pretty like well considered, obviously like accessible and stuff like that. So reinventing what a text field is not a good use of creativity, right? In this particular case. That's not to say that you should never evaluate or reevaluate your form field design, for instance, but that's just more stable and ought to be more stable because it's doing like a specific job rather than like more markety kind of stuff.
The way I tend to think about this really quickly is that I like the idea, this is very sort of general because all the nuance of like each piece can be more or less rigid, each system, each site, each part of the site, all that. But I like the idea that systems in general, we try to build them with more flexibility built into them. And then we try to encourage the appropriate amount of constraint or restraint with cultural things, right? So we want people to make good choices with a flexible system. That's like in my mind, so the ideal, because that enables you to do anything you could possibly want to do within reason with your system, but your organization, kind of like is really putting in the peer pressure, the guidelines, the culture, is saying this is how we operate, this is how we build systems or how we build products.
Yeah, that's something that I've been talking a lot about with my clients the last couple of years is sort of the wall that a lot of design systems have hit with trying to make everything so configurable. And the fact that now everyone's like, oh, wait, we need to do a lot of stuff inside our cards or inside these rows or inside this particular space that is wrapped by a component. And so I've leveraged the term or the phrase, make the common things configurable, AKA really easy, just give them a bunch of knobs, make the uncommon things composable.
Yeah.
So that they can throw together all the different pieces of the UI they need to solve a problem. I think now that particularly Figma is raising its games with variables and so on, and designers are becoming increasingly empowered to define models of visual language, in particular color is sort of the place we're starting. We need to even start thinking about how to make foundational things composable, not just components and sort of rectangles composable in our work too. But the same thing will apply. Make the easy things configurable, make the uncommon things composable so that they have both choices and stuff can be quick or stuff can be flexible. And
Yeah.
sometimes you need to balance the two.
Yeah. And again, like that changes like on a per thing. In across organizations. It's like some organizations, and I'll sort of, I'd be curious to hear how you all work, but it's like whenever we work, we, obviously we get a feel for the culture by usually by way of a lot of like conversations and stuff, and like so much just falls out of those things, and it becomes pretty obvious, like how you ought to architect a system for a client or with a client, right, in order to sort of like match their cultural sort of setup and stuff. And like so much of it, in my view, it's like, or I'll say like my experience is like when you have a bunch of teams that like they don't have designers on each of their scrum teams, they don't have front end developers on each of their scrum teams, they have, they're more like whatever back end or engineering driven or like whatever that might be. Like the system becomes more of a it can be more opinionated and is often welcome to be more sort of like rigid or whatever and provide more, because the people that are consuming it don't want even to like have to, they're like, just give me the answers and don't let me screw it up. Like we've heard that like directly from our clients. They're like, please, because we were like, yeah, we can make your breadcrumbs like kind of composable. They're like, we will put a card in our breadcrumbs if you let us. Don't do that. So we're like, okay, so like that thing is like locked down, like it looks and behaves a certain way, like you can, you pass in like the data to it and that's that, but it's like it is not composable at all. And that was by request. You know what I mean? Versus other organizations that have a bunch of really sort of bright and talented autonomous and creative sort of folks. That's where it's like having a more flexible, here's your parts, and you could kind of like assemble them, and you could be trusted to make those kind of calls. And I like how you're saying that, Ben, with like just kind of like reinforcing, make good decisions, like good parenting advice kind of stuff, right? It's like, yeah, you can do this stuff with like these tools, and we're trusting you to make the right decisions, and you could always talk to us and we'll work through it, but ultimately you have the power. So some people are like, please, like, take this power away from us, it will serve us better, which is fascinating, I think, and like I think very humble, honestly. It's like you're just like, this isn't my department, just give me the answers and like we'll be better off for it, versus other places they want and need and crave that kind of flexibility.
The thing I like about that too, Brad, is that the bigger the company, the more likely you're going to run into needing to serve both. Instead of as us being design system architects, okay, this company, this culture needs really rigid. This culture needs really composable and flexible. Systems these days, you need to offer both. And so, like, do you need to offer a card container you can throw anything you want in there that behaves in the same way and have some overlap with the device card and the plan card and the product card and the whatever other cards that people just want to plug data into and have it produce the outcome? And so architecting those choices means that design system practitioners need to not think about, do we need rigid or do we need composable? Because more often, how are we going to offer both, and how are we going to route people to know which one to choose at the right time?
Yep. Yeah, that was well said. We tend to like deal with that in like the kind of core design system tends to take care of those. Yeah, the card is just a box with like a couple slots in it, right? And just kind of invisible slots and that allows you to sort of say like the header slot is a good place to put these types of things. The body slot is like the default slot, and the footer stuff is like, reserved for actions, for instance, right? So you could kind of write some guidelines even with just a freaking div. Like, it's like a div with some slots in it, and like that's all that thing is. But then there's this kind of we've been like kind of talking about this idea of like, this stuff is just such like a layer cake, and that there are these like opportunities, Nathan, to what you're saying is like being like, yeah, and then we'll also create those product card recipes and those like, whatever customer analytics dashboard, card, whatever, that all are different. They're like composing these stuff, these things to sort of do important work, and to try to shoehorn those things together or sort of have them all sort of coexist under one roof, or to try to like make the card that will solve all of those problems is impossible, right? But at the same time, people want and need to be able to use those compositions consistently within their own sort of sphere, which is why like we're bullish on this like idea of kind of like, here's this like what we call them like recipes, right? It takes the design system ingredients and composes them together to do a certain job. And yeah, like, so you, again, it's like, yeah, that core design system layer is providing the sort of raw materials that allows for that composability, and then elsewhere, sitting on top of it, you're creating the more composed kind of solutions, and it's like a good balancing act, because it doesn't make the design system team need to arbitrarily swat people down and kill their creativity, right? Like if the product teams or certain products, like, we need our card to be like this, like the design system team should not be like, no, right? But also it helps like that like different pace layer sort of like operate at that faster speed, at that more creative speed, and then the core design system team is like witnessing and observing all of this, and can be the kind of curators to be like, ooh, like maybe this should graduate into the core design system, like maybe this is something that we should apply to everyone, or to at least inform and influence like the DNA of the core system.
I want to make sure we get a couple questions in from some folks who are here, and this is a good time for Andres, because we're talking about teams in general, and who's responsible for what. How how many designers are we talking about in like a certain project, and like if you have multiple designers, like do they rotate responsibilities throughout times, or or have there been times when there are no designers assigned to a project, and so what you have is just this system, to lead on? Just kind of curious about team dynamics, I think is what Andre is getting at. And it's a really interesting question, I think, when we're talking about, in the context of creativity, and whether or not you have the design leadership, to like get in there. So I'll open that up. That's a great question, Andre.
The most interesting part of that question to me is the idea of like the sort of rotation of people and or even roles.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things we see is like there's always, not always, usually there's like a designer and developer, like these are the roles we think we need for a system. And in my mind, it's like we need a lot more than that. There's a lot of other things that have to happen, right? There's so much communication, there's so much education, there's so much engagement, there's so much, I don't know, there's just a lot. Customer service, right? Like this is a role I keep thinking about, because it's like we are serving all these other parts of the organization, and we essentially offload that kind of work to designers and developers most often, who are dedicated to a systems team. and they may not have those skills, right? And so it's like, if it's an externally facing product, we hire an entire team of people to support that product, and we just almost completely ignore that most of the time on the system side. So I think of it less as like the titles of the people and more about the functions that have to happen, and most of the time, at least in what I've seen, it's a small number of people that have a whole lot of functional roles that they have to fulfill. um, so yeah, I mean, the numbers of the teams are always different. It's always a different mix. It's always a different makeup, of dedicated and partial and all of that. So I don't know that I have anything, to say this is what the team size is.
Yeah,
But
I think that's a really great way to think about it. You have a range of functional needs on your team, and whether you're talking about actually building the design system team itself, the team making the system, or you're talking about some product or other experience making team implementing with the design system, you also have to think about the capabilities you have at your disposal. And so like the example Brad gave, where you have backend developers and database developers and so on, there's no front end developer, there's no designer. They might not have the capability otherwise to do anything beyond just cobble together an interface using a very rigid design system and putting all the pieces in succession so they can create an interface to enter data in a form or what have you. That might be all they're capable of doing. On the design system team, even, we run into, more often than not, designers and developers that are functioning as product owners, that are functioning as project managers. And so that same type of mentality exists. Like, okay, I've met a lot of capable, including I think myself, people to do that product oriented work, even though they more likely are assigned a design lead or a technical lead kind of role on the team. And so those responsibilities, those functional needs, have to be matched with the capabilities in order for something to thrive in the way that it can thrive.
Yeah. Yeah. This is all made of people, right? So it's like, yeah, like n number of designers is like, I don't want to say irrelevant or wholly irrelevant, but you do need to dig into the nuance of it. And I think that like again, this is just such a team sport, to have like a UX minded person and research minded person, and like providing that perspective is so important and healthy. Obviously, there's things like front end development and like, splitting that even further, what I kind of call like front of the front end, kind of work, but then also people that are more sort of back of the front end sort of focus. It's like just all of these different perspectives kind of converge in this sort of watering hole that is a design system, and it like all sort of plays out, to varying degrees of success. I think we've worked with organizations where they're just like, yeah, like the head count, we need like 4 designers, and like we will fill those roles, and or we'll steal them from, they're just treated as like interchangeable parts, which is, makes sense on a spreadsheet, but not
Yeah,
not
it does
in
not. Yeah.
practice at all. Not in practice at all. And like
Yeah.
the other thing that I like to say is it's like the difference in the mentality of people kind of within and creating a system versus, say, like consuming a system and using it, is like the difference of like, we work at DeWalt and we're making that table saw, or we're making that drill, or we're making those screwdrivers and stuff like that, which is a wholly different exercise than being a general contractor who is wielding those tools in order to build houses and stuff. So it's like, I think that there's just this, yeah, we tend to see it, and Nathan Bennett sounds like you see it a fair amount as well. It's just like sometimes just this lack of nuance is what's so wrong with many aspects of the world. But in this particular realm, it's just like designer, developer are just loaded titles that need unpacked a lot more before you're talking about like actually getting things done. Like who's a good fit for this kind of stuff, who has the right attitude towards it. But then also, Nathan, I think you're exactly right. It's like these kind of like design leaders and technical leaders within a design system team are playing a product role. And Ben, you said it really well. I think this like service oriented kind of attitude, like that, like a design system is a service organization, like that is it. So it's like, even if you're slinging Figma stuff or slinging front end code, like it is your job to interface with people who are using your stuff, and you need to be kind and respectful and like genuinely curious about what they are, and have a thick skin. Like it's not your way or the highway. You're trying to serve them, right? So there's just like all these different like really fascinating kind of personality traits coupled with skill set, coupled with whatever that makes for a good design systems person. It's really fascinating.
Yeah,
So
I love it. It's just like a different world. You know what I mean?
it is. Yeah.
interestingly, I want to dovetail this into a discussion about the global design system proposal, like idea that's being, that Brad, you've introduced it and or introduced and really spearheaded, or are spearheading, I should say, not, past tense. And as we're talking about different roles and the number of people and the evolution and the rigidity or the composability of a design system, is there a correlation between the size of a team and the fidelity and size of a design system? Because as we're talking about a global design system, we're talking about serving a much bigger community. And just how I guess how much fidelity do we need there, to start defining what certain patterns and components are for default web components, that sort of thing. Like, how does that work?
That's a damn good question.
That's what we're solving, right? and,
Yeah.
and then after that, we're going to cure cancer. Okay, it's all good.
Yeah, no, it's good. No, Nathan and Ben, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on all of this. But I think like what I just sort of bring it all the way back to the beginning. I think Nathan, how you framed it is exactly right. It's just like, yeah, here's a set of assets and components that are sort of shared. They address common problems. They're settled science kind of thing, and they're wielded in order to create higher quality web experiences faster, right? Like it's like okay, like that's design systems in a nutshell. But like what we've encountered, all of us, I think collectively over the last whatever, our collective experience is several decades worth of working with their different organizations who are all building tabs, who are all building accordions, who are all building form fields and stuff like that. And now there is some influence on the nature of the organization, whether it's Gap or for Ben or Morningstar. I'm just like cherry picking your examples or your past client work or ours or whatever. It's like we all encounter the same stuff reinvented again and again and again and again, and a lot of those components are not bespoke to the industry, right? Like it is not like, oh yeah, like we're Fortune 500 company versus a startup versus a SaaS company versus a publication versus a whatever. It's like tabs operate the same. They need to have the same semantic relationships going on, accessibility sort of things. The overwhelming difference a lot of the times is in the sort of aesthetic, right, sort of result, right? We want these tabs to be on brand and so on. But it's like because we are lacking tabs, accordions, and compose kind of form controls and things like that, all these teams are having to reinvent all of this stuff at this layer, which again, coming back to respect, I view it as it's not the most respectful use of people's time. And it would be great, just as we were talking before about the establishing of a design system helps free up the minds and headspace of people to do bigger and better things. What I see is a real potential to establish this kind of core layer that's just like, here's this very pragmatic set of components with a few variants each, that's all kind of triangulating the dozens or hundreds or thousands of design systems that are out there in the wild, so that we're not forced doing this. Like, I mean, so much of our work, and Nathan and Ben, again, I'm really eager to hear your perspective on this. So much of our work, and Nathan, you even just like tweeted about this recently, is just like, we're focused on building the core components. Meanwhile, there's all these other facets, all these other important things that are critical to the success of the design system, but everybody's head down building badge, right? And it's like, that's a shame. That is a crying shame. That's not time well spent, right? So it's like, how can we just sort of make that happen? And like the answer, and this is kind of like what we're going through right now, is just like, well, what's like, so you're talking about just getting badge into HTML proper, you're getting like accordion into HTML proper, you're getting like text field into HTML proper. The answer is like, maybe, but also I think that there's an opportunity because HTML needs to move like very, very slow. They need to be comprehensive and can't just like take shortcuts and go, ah, yeah, this is good enough, or this solves 80% of the problem. They need to solve 100% of the problem. So what design systems tend to do is we do cut those corners where we're saying, if you need tabs 80% of the time, it's going to look like this. Maybe you need special funky tabs for your special funky project. That's fine. You could still build that from scratch. But like, so there's this opportunity to be like, here's this just like really pragmatic sort of set of components that are sort of totally like themable, skinnable, can travel anywhere. And that frees organizations, design system teams up to do that service work, to do that gnarly, stuff that is special and unique to their specific organization or industry. So anyways, yeah, I'll shut up, but I'm really interested.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, shut up, please. No. No, we're coming up to our endpoint, and I want to make sure that anyone who has questions in here like feels free to unmute and to ask a question. I just want to give, ample opportunity for that, So let's give a few moments of silence for that. No, I'm just kidding. But I do want people to feel like they can unmute here. So if anyone wants to in these last few minutes, please do. And you can even interrupt me as I'm talking now because no one wants to hear me. No, I do think with this conversation, we're talking about the idea of respecting a lot of people's time, and I just imagine, respecting the whole global community's time and what that frees up as far as innovation goes. And
Yeah.
and just what
Yeah.
other opportunities we have collectively speaking. At that scale, small things can add up to big results.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are certain truths, right? And again,
Yeah.
Ben and Nathan, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. So it's like certain things, like a label needs to be associated with an input. That is true. Like that is a truth. And that is something that gets messed up a billion times across the internet. So just even that, like that's like, in my opinion, like the quintessential use case of, it's like, here's a text field. It's made up of HTML elements, and there is like a valid, I think, conversation to be had. It's like, should HTML include like a field component that just like takes care of that relationship? But it's like, that's a truth, and it's something that gets screwed up a bunch of times, which is why we have these more kind of composed form controls that have, here's the relationship between the label and the input taken care of, and probably some sort of like error handling, right? It's like, that's like a nice little nugget that if we deployed that across the world's web experiences would be a lot better than they are today. So anyways, Nathan, Ben, please, I need to stop talking. Sorry.
Hold on one second. I think Andre has another question, which I'd love to hear.
Okay.
Oh, we're not hearing you, unfortunately. At least I'm not. Nope, not quite. I'm sorry. I hate like technical. Oh, can you hear him? No. Oh shoot. Sorry, Andre. My gosh, I hate it. It's like always, Zoom or Meet or something always tries to like, screw up at least one person talking. So it just seems like a default standard. Do you want to type it in, perhaps? Yeah, sure. In the meantime here, uh, you know, as I'm hearing, about the the possibility of like design systems like limiting creativity and all this, like I hear the same sort of complaint with accessibility. And when we're talking about accessibility here, we're almost hitting like this like collision of like, you're just like tampering all my creativity. You can't let me do anything. I have to make things contrast, legible. I have to make things big enough to do this, and I have to pair this with this all the time. Is that just like, is that just part of the web, and part of
No,
the
wait.
responsibility of what we do?
No, like, okay, I want to be patient. I want to trust people. I want to ensure everybody has all their autonomy. But I also want to be in a space and participating in a community where people understand the responsibility of their craft. And part of that is learning all the things around accessibility that you need to learn to be a good designer, to be a good UI designer, to be a good front end developer. That's part of being part of this profession. We don't have licenses. We don't have ways that we test people. That's not how our profession works. But I think our profession should work with an expectation that different people are going to come respecting that those things need to work that way, and are willing to learn and accord the work that they produce to meet those kinds of standards because they believe in the collective pursuit of what we're trying to do. So I don't have a lot of patience for people that are like, I don't care if it's not accessible. I like the way my gray looks.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's beautifully said, Nathan.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely. Let's get Andre's question in here to wrap things up. He says, Nathan, well, my window just like scrolled on me. He says, I really like that you're working with hundreds of designers. I'm on the very other end of the scale, working with a handful of designers at most, if at all. My question is, have you experienced those scenarios before? Because to me, the design system also serves to explain the rationale behind why a certain design is the way it is. In professional settings, I was working with a company that used micro front ends across a dozen or so projects. Their designers tried to gather the different implementations and consolidate them. Like, yeah. So in your experience, have you come across a scenario like that, and how'd you like work around that?
Actually, Andre adds, in another case, there was a client where the designer burnt through so fast that the Figma was not enough for the next designer to pick up what the former left. Yeah, there's a lot of dynamics that are probably implicit in what you're talking about. But yeah, I still work with coaching clients that they're working on some marketing site, or they have 3 designers, one of whom is accorded, hey, can you organize all our stuff in Figma so that we do it all consistently? And so you sort of get from this point of, hopefully you're learning as a designer or developer to do your own work systematically, to where you transition into you're actually serving other people with the system you create. And that kind of transformation happens with just a few people, even if it's not as formal as we have a formal design system and it's all documented on Zero Height and it's all very formally published on a sort of as an npm package that's formally versioned, etc. It doesn't have to be that in order for it to be a system. And so as you talk about different designers trying to bring their work together and consolidate different ideas, like maybe a progress bar across their 3 different experiences and how a progress bar should you can still use the principles of design systems to relieve a lot of that potential redundant work and inconsistent work that you do using the practices we have, even if it's not formally published in that way. And so that's the kind of advice I give and the kind of observations I try to look for and see and help guide other teams through, even if there's just 1 or 2 designers applying their craft.
Last thing I want to put out there, and this is to each of you. What is your 30-second pitch to somebody who says, I don't want to work in the system, it limits my creativity? Just what's your 30-second pitch?
I'll start. I'd say, first of all, what about the system don't you want to live within? And second of all, what is the experimentation on autonomy going to bring to the enterprise and the value you're going to bring by doing that? Because if those 2 things are in accordance and you should go off and do your thing, that's great. The other thing I would say is, are you talking about visual consistency? Are you talking about experience consistency? Design systems do pretty poorly with UX consistency across an enterprise, but UI consistency, that's our game. And so like, what kind of consistency, what kind of autonomy are you really looking to spark up? Let's dig into some of the nuance that Ben was noting earlier.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Ben.
That question for me is like, where do you want to innovate? I mean, that's really it. It's like, if you want to innovate on border radius, you're probably in the wrong business, so it's like, solve the right problems. Design is problem solving. Go solve the right problems, the bigger problems, the new problems.
Beautiful. And Brad, we'll cap it off with your pitch.
Yeah,
He's like, nah, done. Ditto.
no, it's less a pitch. I think Nathan's instinct of asking questions to figure out what exactly, because so much of this stuff and just even defining a design system can be an exercise and a fun exercise. So it's like a lot of times it just really requires like kind of digging in deeper to better understand what their mentality is, how they're viewing this, in order to sort of better serve them. Because I think, yeah, I agree with basically what Nathan said. It's just like there's all sorts of nuance to it, and like you can be like flexible and creative and stuff like that, but it's like, and the hope is that the design system supports that kind of flexibility and stuff, right? Like it's not the arbiter of all decisions, and that you are just merely a cog in the machine just assembling these parts, like a worker on assembly line. You still have a lot of agency, you still have a lot of work to do to assemble this stuff properly, right? So I think that it is just kind of like a meeting of better understanding them, and then sort of like helping unpack like how it's like, no, in fact a design system does, wielding this design system will continue to give you what you need in order to get things done. But also, if it's like our project is a brand new redesign, blue sky, green field, whatever analogy you want to use, like, then that's the brief. Then don't use the system, right? Like you're creating the next new amazing thing, and like, yeah, like don't if that's what the brief is, then maybe it does make sense to just kind of totally walk away from it and do something completely different. But yeah.
And and then there's Andre here. Blue sky, green field equals Windows XP wallpaper. Love that.
It's beautiful.
Well, we have reached the cap of our time here, and I just want to thank like each of our panelists here: Nathan, Ben, Brad, everyone who participated in questions, everyone that's just here hanging out with us. Like I just really want to thank you for showing up and hanging out, just having a good discussion about things that we're all talking about and all trying to figure out together. And we'll recap some of this, share some of the resources and the links and the notes that we've taken. But otherwise, I just want to wish you all a fantastic day, rest of the week, and I hope to see you on another one of these calls in a very, very short time. So thanks again for coming in, y'all. I appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
All right, bye.
Bye.